Spectre Vision Radio.
Welcome to El Cine Underground, where we expose the film history they left us out of. I'm Mariana Da Silva. I'm a film lover, your friend, and your host, coming to you from Spectre Vision Radio. Spooky season is upon us, and Latin cinema has no shortage of terrifying creatures and nightmarish abominations to haunt your dreams. We've talked about icons like La Llorona in previous episodes, as well as the Latin versions of universal monsters like Dracula and Frankenstein. But today we're talking about a horror icon who exists in our real world, a Brazilian filmmaker named José Mojica Marins, also known as Zé do Caixão, or to the world as Coffin Joe.
O que é a vida? É o princípio da morte. O que é a morte? É o fim da vida. O que é a existência? É a continuidade do sangue. O que é o sangue? É a razão da existência.
This week was a challenging week here as we explored these films. It was a very surreal experience to rewatch these films because growing up in Brazil, Zé do Caixão, Coffin Joe is an icon to everyone, children as well as adults. Lourdes Portillo, who is an incredible filmmaker, once said that if you're talking about culture, you have to talk about the positive and the negative. It's your responsibility to discuss all of it and shine light on the things that maybe aren't so pleasant, because that's how change happens. As I revisited these films, I felt very uncomfortable. I've come to the realization that as we make this podcast, it becomes very personal because film is a personal experience. That's why it's very hard if you don't like a film that they like. It resonates maybe with them because it's personal. Watching movies is a very personal thing. So I had a very hard time seeing that a man who made a living off of telling stories about abuse and very misogynistic was worshipped in that way. I had a hard time understanding that I, as a child, was okay knowing about and adoring a character that is awful. We tried very hard to find the beauty, and there is a lot of inspiration in his story. I find that it's important to say that I've personally dealt with abuse, so it's hard for me to watch his films. Angel, who's behind the camera here, we watch the movies together or we watch them apart. But I was experiencing it in Portuguese while he was experiencing it in English. And we have no idea if that influenced some of the emotions that I felt while covering this person. There's still immense value in exploring here why. When you're talking about culture, it's important to shine a light on the machismo that exists. And so if that's something that is challenging for you, there will be hard conversations happening in this episode. And I hope that you'll stick around, but totally understandable if this is not a conversation you want to have. But I welcome you to, because I learned so much and it's made me ask myself and ask society around me why was a person like this put on a pedestal? So I hope that you can join us in asking those questions.
Eu sou o Zé do Caixão. Eu moro no Castelo dos Horrores. Eu moro no Castelo dos Horrores. E assombração. Não tenho medo de assombração. Eu sou o Zé do Caixão. Eu sou o Zé do Caixão. Eu moro no Castelo dos Horrores. Eu moro no Castelo dos Horrores. E assombração. Não tenho medo de assombração. Eu sou o Zé do Caixão. Eu sou o Zé do Caixão.
Zé do Caixão is definitely an icon, but certainly not a hero. And before his mind brought him the image that would become Coffin Joe, he was a boy sleeping in a cinema in between reels. José Mojica Marins was born on Friday the 13th and raised literally in a cinema. His father managed a theater and his mother worked in the concession stand. They lived above the cinema in São Paulo. He was taught life lessons through celluloid, raised by flicker and noise, screams and saints, and Hollywood melodrama. By 15, he was shooting westerns in his backyard on 8mm and 16mm cameras, almost always starring himself. And by 30, he created a character that was so wholeheartedly Brazilian, casting himself once again. A character that was equally beloved as he was despised. The nihilistic undertaker who mocks God, tortures women, and worships only his own bloodline.
Pare, Zé, pare! Você vai matar o coitado! Piedade, Zé. O meu trabalho já é demais com quem tem morte natural. Vocês podem estar certos. Vou acabar cobrando dobrado a quem me obrigar a matá-lo. Vamos embora, Zé. Vamos.
Let's get something straight. José Mojica was a folk icon of Brazilian horror, but he was not a visionary savior of cinema. He was a hustler, a self-mythologizer, and often a sadist with a camera. He used shock to survive, and when it worked, he believed his own legend. And that's what makes his films both so electric and hard to stomach.
Ainda há tempo. Não assistam a esse filme. Vão embora. Tarde demais. À meia-noite levarei tua alma.
In 1964, Coffin Joe storms into Brazilian film history with the film At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul. A meia-noite eu levo sua alma. With a top hat, a cape, and clawed nails. The scariest thing about Marins' monster is that he is not a monster at all. He is a man. He spits on religion, beats his wife, and murders to find someone to carry the seed of his male heir, so he could technically live forever.
Piedade.
Isso. Agora está como gosto. Você me dará o filho que quero.
It's brutal, low budget, and unforgettable. Shot like a fever dream in the back alleys of São Paulo in do-it-yourself sets built by Marins in abandoned spaces. Marins gives us no escape hatch, just the male ego and atheism merging into fascism. He shows us what you were getting from frame one. Coffin Joe speaks directly to us, the audience, poetically about life and death, and then an opening sequence with women screaming and laughter and haunting music. Watching it today is complicated, especially for a woman, because the film knows exactly what it's doing. It's using violence as a spectacle and then calling that spectacle a philosophy. You're not meant to root for Coffin Joe, you're meant to endure him, and that endurance is part of the experiment. Marins' acting is Shakespearean, and it's fully on display as he crawls up walls, screaming, asking God to destroy him if he is real.
Poder da fé, símbolo da ignorância. Onde estás, ó diabo? Eu desafio seus poderes, renego a sua existência. Nada existe. Somente a vida. Nada é mais forte que a minha descrença. Destrua-me! Eu não creio em nada. Quero a prova do castigo!
He is mocking morality and the idea that the wicked will be punished. But as despicable of a character as Coffin Joe is, one of his main traits is that he cannot bear to witness children being harmed. So he will abuse innocent men and women, but he will not hurt a child. In the end, Coffin Joe gets what's coming to him. Or does he?
É a vida o tudo e a morte o nada? Ou é a vida o nada e a morte o tudo?
3 years later, Marins doubles down with 1967's At Midnight, I'll Possess Your Corpse. A meia-noite, eu encarnarei no teu cadáver. Coffin Joe returns from the brink of death with zero remorse for his crimes and right back to terrorizing his community. He's searching for the perfect mother for his future son, who will carry out his bloodline and legacy. Testing women like laboratory specimens, a grotesque parody of masculine purity.
A experiência passou. Pequeno susto para medir a coragem de vocês.
He uses women for his own entertainment and then kills them and calls it natural selection. He is all the worst aspects of man amplified to the max. The other thing he doubles down on is his hatred for religion. As he tortures one of his victims, he claims if God was real, that The victim would be here and he would be there as he crushes him to death.
Deixo-te na mão de teu Deus. Se ele apagar a corda, está salvo. Do contrário, boa viagem.
The film is louder, crueler, more theatrical, and it hits its peak in a hell sequence where Coffin Joe is literally ripped out of bed by a demon and dragged to hell.
Não! Não quero ir!
Encarnar em teu cadáver. Vou 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 encarnar em teu cadáver.
The sequence bursts into color in an otherwise black and white nightmare. It's beautiful, it's disturbing, and it's pure exploitation. The camera lingers on women's terror, as though beauty can justify violence. That's the Coffin Joe paradox. He is criticizing moral hypocrisy while practicing it in real time. Coffin Joe has often been referred to as the Brazilian Freddy Krueger, a mystical being here to terrorize the innocent and bring about chaos wherever he goes. There are no redeeming qualities to Coffin Joe. He is pure evil. And just as society becomes obsessed with serial killers, culture became obsessed with Zé do Caixão.
O meu mundo é estranho, mas é digno de todos que o queiram aceitar. E nunca corrupto como querem fazê-lo. Pois é composto, meu amigo, de pessoas estranhas. Mas não mais estranhas do que você!
By 1970, Brazil was under military dictatorship. Censorship was tightening and paranoia was daily life. So Zé do Caixão goes meta, and he makes The Awakening of the Beast, Os Rituales dos Sádicos, a film that pretends to be a documentary about LSD and moral decay. A panel of psychiatrists discuss the role of drugs provoking sexual deviancy in society.
Mas qual a relação com o seu caso, doutor?
O que tem a ver com o meu caso? Uma bacanal de viciados, num ritual de taras, cuja consequência tirou a vida de um adolescente.
Um crime como outro qualquer, resultado da formação moral dos seus participantes.
Concordo plenamente. São os atos anormais de uma juventude sem freio. Não vejo relação com a sua teoria, doutor.
Cano vagabundo. Ah, eu não fiz nada! Me solta! Ai, minhas costas! Me solta! Eu não fiz nada! Vocês vão me pagar! Sem vergonha! Me solta! Entra aí! Eu não fiz nada! É o caos da sociedade, senhores. O mundo fecha os olhos e o homem cruza os braços diante do naufrágio total de uma geração.
Doutor, lembre-se, estamos falando de tóxicos, e não das feridas do mundo.
E as raízes desse mal provêm do quê?
Se não me engano, as declarações do doutor referem-se aos tóxicos.
One doctor even admits to performing experiments on 4 addicts, and Coffin Joe appears both as filmmaker and villain. Marins' role is as an expert of depravity, and his character, Coffin Joe, is presented as an icon with his own movies, comics, and theme song. It's a mirror of the regime. It's panic disguised as science and censorship posed as protection. Marins smuggles his critique through horror and hides behind the spectacle. The movie feels like a direct response to the criticism and censorship that Marins faced in real life. Instead of backing down, he goes further past the line of decency. The movie opens with back-to-back scenes of sex and violence, and it becomes completely overwhelming. And it's probably how Marins wanted you to feel. You question when you watch his work whether he's in on the joke or whether you yourself are what he's laughing at. In the film, Marins is questioned on the merits of his own films and what place do they have in Brazil and in Brazilian cinema, and why he can't make anything that's nice and good.
José Mojica Marins, mais conhecido como Zé do Caixão, autor, diretor, ator e produtor de filmes e programas de televisão. A maioria da crítica não o leva a sério. Zé do Caixão, cineasta ou farsante? Culpado ou inocente? É o que o Tribunal Popular da Verdade vai procurar saber a partir deste momento. O que você pensa da vida?
Completamente vazia.
Então por que não se mata?
Suicídio é crime.
Que contribuição o senhor imagina que está dando com seus filmes para o cinema brasileiro?
Dar emprego a uma série de gente e levar ao público aquilo que o público quer ver.
Você não pode fazer um filme que levasse uma mensagem de felicidade?
Fazer cinema no Brasil é a mesma coisa que fazer um foguete aqui e mandar à Lua. Não temos recursos para fazer cinema. E o diretor tem que criar um personagem. Tem que sair para outros lados. Tem que importar filme virgem! Filme virgem! Inventar o que já está inventado. Tem que dar ao público aquilo que ele quer ver. Porque senão, não tem jeito. Os cinemas fecham as portas. Você vai vender banana e o diretor comer casca.
His defense is that he was giving people what they want, sex and violence. A controversial movie made to be controversial, and that's why it was suppressed and banned. But Coffin Joe loved the notoriety. He knew that scandal sold more tickets than salvation.
Forças benignas ou malignas jamais irão se interpor entre o mortal estigmatizado por mim.
O seu mundo é uma obra de arte.
To understand how radical Marins was and how disruptive a character like Coffin Joe was to Brazilian cinema, we must discuss Cinema Novo. Cinema Novo was Brazil's radical film movement that began in the 1960s. It was born out of poverty, poetry, and politics. Its name, Cinema Novo, means new cinema. But it wasn't about shiny techniques. It was about truth. Filmmakers like Glauber Rocha, Nelson Pereira dos Santos, and Rui Guerra turned the camera to Brazil's real people, the poor, the workers, and the forgotten. They rejected Hollywood gloss and instead shot in favelas, deserts, fields with handheld cameras and natural light. Their motto could have been Rocha's famous line, an idea in your head and a camera in your hand. Cinema Novo wasn't horror, it was hunger. Rocha even said that Brazilians' hunger should be filmed, not as a symbol, but as a tragedy. These films demanded that audiences feel the tragedy of inequality and the brutality of dictatorship. While Coffin Joe was making nightmares from the gutter, Cinema Novo was making revolution from it. One used horror to shock, and the other used realism to wound. But both were screaming that Brazil was haunted. While Cinema Novo chased social realism, Coffin Joe dove into trash aesthetics. But both weren't just rebellion. They were a form of survival. Marins filmed horror as working-class resistance, dirty, cheap, and loud. Censors ignored gore if it avoided politics, so blood became a loophole. Violence was safer than the truth. Coffin Joe's blasphemy let Marins say what the newspaper couldn't. that morality is just another costume for power, and religion is the opiate of the masses.
Ué, cadê a carne?
Hoje não tem. Você esqueceu que é Sexta-feira Santa?
Que me importa que seja Sexta-feira dos Santos ou do demônio? Eu vou buscar o que quero e nenhum carola vai intervir. Hoje eu como carne, nem que seja carne de gente.
Cuidado, Zé, o diabo tenta.
Se eu o encontrar, vou convidá-lo para jantar.
But as the political power shifted in Brazil in the 1960s, so did the censorship. In 1964, Brazil's military gained power in a coup from fear of communism and a quiet approval of the United States. They promised order, but what they gave was silence for the next 21 years. The military censored the press, jailed artists, tortured dissidents, and exiled intellectuals. Filmmakers had to shoot in whispers. Every metaphor was a weapon, and every cut was a protest. You couldn't show the truth, so you hid it in horror, in allegory, in dreams. While Cinema Novo used realism to fight censorship, José Mojica Marins used blasphemy, dressed up in horror, as hearsay instead of politics. The censors didn't always understand what they were seeing, and that's how Coffin Joe slipped through. A nightmare about the regime that they didn't know was about them.
Enfim, Dr. Sérgio, o que quer dizer com tudo isto?
O tóxico nada mais é que uma desculpa para a libertação do instinto de cada ser humano. Isto quer dizer que se a pessoa praticou um crime sob a ação do tóxico, é porque a sua mente já era doentia e o instinto alcançava as raias do inconcebível. Em suma, esse ser representa perigo para a sociedade. A minha mensagem não é acabar com o tóxico, e sim moderar o seu uso, fortalecer a vigilância em torno dos que fazem o comércio com essa ameaça. Foi isso que procurei ao fazer a experiência de autossugestão com esses viciados.
Art that pushes boundaries is absolutely necessary. But when you're creating your art at the expense of the well-being of your cast and crew, it becomes difficult to praise or excuse. People who worked on Marin's set said that they were haunted, that it felt like they were working through a horror movie, not only on a horror movie. There were often snakes and spiders. It was a terrifying set, they would say. He would push his actors to the limit, humiliate them, and sometimes even hurt them. During This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse, an actress was actually choked by a real snake. No stunt crew, no safety. Just fear, film, and Marins screaming to keep going. He believed that the suffering made it all real, that horror had to be felt to be captured. But that's not art. That's abuse, dressed as authenticity. And it forces you to ask, how much of Coffin Joe was character and how much of it was confession? Marins claimed that he was exercising Brazil's hypocrisy, but maybe he was also feeding into his own darkness and calling it cinema. That's the paradox of exploitation. The camera doesn't just capture power, it wields it. These movies that exploit the pain and suffering of women are called exploitation films. They're the outlaws of cinema. They are made cheap, shot quick, and sold on shock. These films didn't pretend to be respectable. They exploited whatever people would be secretly hungry for: violence, sex, fear, and rebellion. In Latin America, it mutated into something darker. Horror mixed with politics, poverty, and faith. The filmmakers couldn't afford polish, so they gave you raw nerve. But here's the contradiction. They exploit the image of the oppressed, the workers, the poor, the women, to profit. It can be revolutionary or predatory, and sometimes both in the same frame. Coffin Joe lived inside that contradiction. He was cruelty sold as art. And that's the genius and danger of exploitation. It shows you the truth while also taking something from you. Every woman in a Coffin Joe movie is a symbol of purity, fertility, punishment. They're not allowed to be human. They're only there to feed his obsession with legacy. And that obsession, the idea that a man's worth is proven through domination, well, that's real horror.
Será este o momento?
Matei teu irmão.
Eu quero ser tua.
Sim. És a mulher superior. Serás minha. Serás a mãe de meu filho.
Because the dictatorship was controlling the body of politics, Coffin Joe was controlling women's bodies on screen. Both systems wanted the same thing: obedience disguised as order. To watch as a woman is to feel trapped in two gazes, one of the states and one of the filmmakers. One censors your speech and the other frames your suffering. And yet there's a strange power in not looking away, in looking back. And that's how exploitation becomes revelation. You realize that monster isn't just in the movie. It's in the culture that made it. To watch Coffin Joe as a woman is to feel every contradiction in your own body. You can admire the nerve and also hate the man and the people who made it. You can admire his defiance and also realize how much that defiance landed on women's bodies. These aren't feminist films, they're films about the failure of men and the rot under machismo and masculinity. If they endure, it's because they don't let us look away. They make you confront the ugliness that polite cinema edits out. I feel very conflicted talking about him because in Brazil, Coffin Joe wasn't just a filmmaker. He was everywhere. And he was admired. It's been really hard to watch these films and think of how a society would allow somebody like that and films like that to become such a household name, that women's pain is spoken of so uncaringly. And I think it just goes to show how society overlooks the treatment of women over and over again and normalizes the suffering. Coffin Joe and the filmmaker Marins hosted TV shows. He judged costume pageants and he showed up at Carnival. He was on top of a float, which is the greatest honor in Brazilian culture. And what does that say about us? About our culture? About a man who built fame on cruelty? That our monsters are allowed to dance in daylight as long as they make good entertainment. And that's the part that stays with me. That's the possession I can't seem to shake.
Não entendo. Seja mais claro. O que pretende fazer conosco?
Matá-las.
Não, não creio.
Costumo cumprir o que prometo. Aquela é tua.
Não! Não! Não!
Não gosto de dramas.
Coffin Joe is exploitation personified. He's what happens when poverty, censorship, and ego collide. Marins turned cheapness into style and cruelty into myth. He wasn't interested in empathy. He was interested in impact. He gave Brazil their own monster, and he gave himself a mask that he never took off. An icon? Absolutely. A hero? Not a chance. José Mojica Marins died in 2020, dressed as Coffin Joe. The man and the monster never separated. And I guess that's the danger of growing up in a theater. You never know when the movie really ends. There's no easy moral here. Coffin Joe is not a hero, and José Mojica Marins is maybe not necessarily a monster. They both prove, though, that cinema can be used as a weapon and can also really wound. He showed us that horror doesn't just live in ghosts. It lives in systems, in churches, and in men who think they're God. And maybe that's why his films still get under our skin. Because they remind us how easy it is to mistake power for art and cruelty for conviction. So this Halloween, remember the boy who slept in the theater and then grew up to haunt them. But really, I can't help but wonder how much of this is a result of poverty and the cruelty that people who are in these really tough places and the violence they have to face, and then having to normalize that for yourself.
Happy Halloween!
Happy Halloween!
Corta.
Tudo que existe, meu Deus, vai ser triste. Tudo que existe, meu Deus, vai ser...
Oh yeah, we got through it. Our first difficult conversation. Well, gracias for hanging out with me. And if you like this, hit subscribe for more. And follow us at Somos El Cine on Instagram. El Cine is a film collective based in Los Angeles doing everything in our power to bring these films to a cinema near you. And for all-around great repertory theater, check in with our friends at Revival Hub for listings. So join us. Come gather. Nos vemos ahí at El Cine and here on Spectre Vision Radio. This podcast would not be possible without the patience, support, and production of Ángel Salinas.
Spectre Vision Radio.